This is Colin Lobo with the National Ready Mix Concrete Association. And the purpose of this webinar is to just sort of give you a general overview of the certification program, some of the policy things, some of the things that have changed recently with the certification criteria, and just to talk a little bit about the responsibilities of how we would administer this certification. Just to keep this webinar relatively understandable, because we do get background noise if we open up the lines for everybody to speak. We have kept all attendees muted at this point, but you can type in your questions in the question box or in the chat box that you will have in your control panel, and I will try to address them as we go along. Okay. Let's see. So this is what I plan to do today. Just go over a little bit of the program details. This webinar is scheduled for 2 hours, but I don't plan to take that long. At the end of the webinar, I will open up all the lines so that people can ask questions verbally. And in the meantime, if you have any specific questions, you can jot them down or just type them in the question box. I had asked if people wanted questions addressed prior so that I could be prepared to answer those, but I didn't receive any, so I'm going to wing it if you ask me questions. So these are what I plan to go over today, a little bit of the program details, some of the, not into too much detail on the policy. I think you local sponsoring groups were provided a copy of the revised policy with the red line version so that you could see what was changed from the previous policy documents, and that included some of the necessary forms and stuff like that. So I'll go through some of those changes as we discuss this. Some of the LSG responsibilities relative to holding a course and conducting an exam, some of the forms that we want to collect during the administration of an exam, some changes in the certification criteria and how that needs to be submitted to NRMCA. And I'll just go through some of the available resources with respect to the presentations and also the review questions and what's on the website for you to access and look for. And then finally, I'll just talk a little bit about what's happening in ACI 522 regarding contractor qualifications, at least as a ballot item that impacts this certification program. So I guess just to start off, naturally we understand that there has been a significant interest in pervious concrete because it does facilitate a very good option for stormwater management and fits into the sustainable development concepts that are progressing around the country, and also possibly can contribute when a project applies for LEED credits, can contribute towards LEED credits towards the project. As we see this evolving, we see that it is a significant opportunity for concrete applications, and the purpose of the certification program naturally is to make sure that that the installation of pervious concrete is successfully done, because it is not the same procedures that we use for traditional flat work. And if we do not do this successfully, it will, of course, lend a negative eye towards the whole market and possibly reduce the potential for its success. Just a background on this particular program, at some point there was a task group that was interested in developing a certification program to ensure this, and this started in around 2004. Initially ACI was approached, but it was considered that they might take a little time going through their process, so NRMCA was asked if they would administer this program. And so from the time of concept to the point that it was started was about a year, and so the program was established in August 2005. and it's seen significant growth, and we are happy to see that. And naturally, the program has to evolve as the technology evolves and the need for Pervious placements also increases. At this point, we think we have about 48 local sponsoring groups that are approved to administer the certification program. The local sponsoring groups have control over a geographic area and are approved by us through an application form, and most of you will hopefully have that in place. Shonita is sort of, in our office, is sort of the manager of the program, and she gets in all the paperwork and processes the exams and certifications, and she estimates that have been, since that time, about 700 certification programs offered, which is quite a lot. NRMCA has offered about 4 train the trainer programs that varied a little bit. The first one was sometime in 2006, I think, in Maryland. Along with the demo, there've been one in Houston, most recently in Charlotte, which was mainly a face-to-face with potential trainers. And that was in conjunction with the release of a revised text. If you go to our website, and I'll show you a little bit about how you can do that, we estimate that there are, at this point, about 7,100 technicians, 60 installers, and 26 craftsmen. So you see a big disconnect between the number of people who have sat for an exam and the people who have upgraded to the installer and craftsman level, which is where we want to have people who have work experience to actually be. And so I guess as local sponsoring groups, we want to encourage people who have come for the certification exams and have gone through the training to upgrade as they have projects under their belts, to upgrade to the installer and craftsman level, because those are the levels we want to support and promote as qualified contractors. The technician level still does serve a purpose, and I'll show you some of the discussions or descriptions as to the intent of these levels as established by the committee. We've sold a lot of techs, and we continue to print techs as we evolve. The process of development initially was a task group of NRMCA, and at that point, Matt Offenberg, who was with Rinco Materials at that point, was chairing the task group. And Matt has still continued to remain on this particular task group. He is currently with W.R. Grace, and he's now the chair of this certification committee. We established certification policies, and initially they were just stolen from ACI, if you will, and based on the ACI Flatwork Certification Program that establishes levels like technician and craftsman. And at that point we offered, or we essentially mimicked the same criteria, though we understood for craftsmen that the required work experience would be hard to achieve for those involved in pervious concrete. To accelerate the development of a text, the RMC Research and Education Foundation funded the development of the text, and it was initially written by Don Wade and reviewed and approved after the first edition was approved by the task group that was originally issued in August 2005, subsequently revised, and more recently with a significant revision in August 2010. One of the processes of the revision is, of course, to address as technology evolves, to update the text to reflect the current thinking and technology about pervious concrete. Once you have a structure of a text that's already developed, it's hard to move away from that. And so we still feel that the text is a little cumbersome, and so your feedback on updating and revising the text is always welcome. As we develop the text, we do develop the exam questions, and in this with this revision, we have a pretty large exam bank that we then basically use for our exams. And so exams will differ because we use different questions in different versions of the exam. We do go through a continuous process of evaluation on the exam questions as they come in. If we get challenges to exam questions, we'll try to verify that it is adequate. If it is something that we understand that people are getting the answer wrong quite often, then we will correct that as appropriate. Okay. Larry has a question regarding a Spanish version. I'll get to that a little later. Okay. This is the new text, and it essentially has the same chapters. These are the chapters, if you will. It basically covers some general aspects about the sustainability aspects of pervious pavement. It includes some discussion of the development of pervious concrete mixtures and production, the tools and equipment necessary for installation, some general design principles so that the contractor is aware of what's needed and what is the primary purpose of pervious pavements, and then the chapter on construction, and finally on maintenance and troubleshooting. We also have a pretty large section on review questions with answers, and with this version also developed useful checklists that can be used by various parties on a construction project. We have developed, with Lionel's help, the presentation that follows the text. The presentation is provided to the local sponsoring groups as a resource. You don't have to use it in the version that we provide. It is considerably long and detailed, and depending on how you structure your training program, you can modify your training the provided presentation as appropriate. Again, hopefully the goal is to try to provide a training program that prepares people to answer the exam relative to what's included in the text. There's a separate presentation that has all the review questions on a PowerPoint format so that you can do a review after you complete the training session. So those are the primary resources at this point that we provide to the local sponsoring groups. And hopefully you find those useful to use in your training efforts. Just a acknowledgement of the people who were involved in the revision of the text, and if there are big problems, of course, you can blame them for it. And so these are the names of the people that were involved in the text revision. And naturally, as with anything, you would have a diverse set of opinions on this, and it was relatively challenging to try to come to consensus on some items that ended up in the text. And in some cases, we had to come to a consensus as to what needed to be covered in the text. Lionel then took the finalized text and reworked the presentation so that it addresses and follows the text. So Lionel is acknowledged for the presentation and blamed for any problems in it. This is the committee that was established about 4 years ago, and this was as part of our policy that we wanted to establish a committee. As you can see, there are different types of people represented on the committee that include local sponsoring groups, contractors, concrete producers, and also designers or engineers who might specify pervious concrete. So in that way, we've sort of tried to keep a balance so that we get the viewpoint and opinion of the different parties that might be involved. And so that's the committee that meets primarily by conference call when we have to establish and discuss policy issues. So one short note about this organizing a training event, and we do get requests periodically that we want to give a training event tomorrow because this contractor's got a job day after tomorrow and we have to get them certified and stuff like that. And we recommend that you try to avoid that if you establish a scheduled program, even if people don't come. If you establish a schedule, then you can lean on the schedule, and there are several local sponsoring groups that will set a fixed schedule of training events for the year or at least 6 months prior, so that if people want to get certified, they can plan to attend the scheduled events. We request that you please make your requests for certification materials that include the textbooks and the exams in a timely fashion. In general, the textbooks are on the shelf, so those are relatively easy to pack and ship out, but the exams are printed on demand because we do vary the exams and versions of exams very often. And so these are not sitting on a shelf, and they have to be printed after you make your request, and then there's a coding process and stuff that Shonita goes through before she ships out the exam. We also request that you make your request for these materials early enough before the program. We also suggest that you provide a copy of the text to the attendees ahead of time so that they can actually read it and study it, because it's very hard to go through the significant content of that text and then try to answer the exam that afternoon. In many cases, of course, we understand that you will not know your final number of attendees until the day of the program, and in those cases, naturally, last-minute attendees would have to be provided a text at the last minute. And so we understand those sorts of contingencies do occur. One of the things that the committee is sort of trying to emphasize is that while it's probably useful to just do a face-to-face lecture, if you will, the planning of a demonstration of a placement of Pervious is very important and probably adds a lot of value to training contractors as to what differs when you install Pervious concrete, to get a feel for the type of mix that they will be dealing with. And some sponsoring groups have very good success in partnership with ready-mix producers and contractors, and with a set of equipment available where they will have demonstrations for every training program that they offer. And we understand that in some cases the local sponsoring groups could be constrained on organizing a demonstration along with a training event with respect to resources and possibly cost implications and stuff like that. You might consider videos, and we are looking at collecting videos on proper installations or other hands-on demonstrations that you can get a touch and feel of what Pervious concrete actually looks like, what's dry, what's wet, and what's good. Possibly project site visits as part of the training program, or even during construction if you can schedule that. We do have some sort of guidance in a document that is available to you, and I'll just go through that. But it is a document, I think, that has been provided in your thing. So if you get a chance, this sort of gives you a general guidance as to what you might consider when you are planning a training and training event, performance evaluation, and examination. Okay, at this point, let's see. At this point, I'm going to go relatively briefly and relatively quickly through some of the certification policies, just to emphasize some of the things that we are interested in. And so the certification policies are generally covered in these 8 and there probably 9 sections that was sent to you. And I'm sure you all read it page to page and word to word and can recite it backwards. But I'll just go through a few items over here. We have 3 certification levels, as you are aware of: the technician, the installer, and the craftsman. One of the concerns of the committee has been the relatively loose type work experience documentation specifically for the craftsman level. On the installer, of course, we have a project basis thing. On the craftsman level, we have a number of hours of work experience basis, and so we've tried to emphasize or strengthen the work experience documentation part of the submitting or the process of evaluating and approving someone's craftsman level certification. So one of the things that the committee took a long time to sort of define and discuss is what is the intent of the different levels. And so I'm just going to go through this relatively briefly. It's the technician, of course, is a person who has just demonstrated knowledge, and we'll go through the criteria later, by successful completion of the written exam. And through the written exam process, they have demonstrated that they know the proper procedures to place compact finish, edge, joint cure, and protect pervious concrete pavements. But they don't necessarily have, at this point, the requisite field experience to qualify them for the higher levels that are desirable. Okay, so this one is just pass the exam, you get a technician certification. Now, naturally, we want to say, okay, this is sort of what the committee felt was intent of this level. It's intended for contractor or non-contractor personnel in learning proper techniques. It is assumed that contractor personnel who are certified as technicians, if they go on a project, they will be actually supervised by an individual with a higher level of certification. That is the hope. And then when they get the adequate experience in projects under their belt, they will upgrade to the higher level of installer and craftsman. Secondly, this level is intended for, as we have in that 7,100 number, a lot of these people, intended for non-contractor persons such as ready-mix concrete guys, testing labs, inspectors, admixture people, specifiers and engineers who need to understand this. So we understand that these people may not be actually placing pervious, but at least they've gone through the content necessary to get them a understanding of what pervious concrete is all about. And this level is also recommended for individuals who are knowledgeable about and want to participate in training programs for local sponsoring groups, so that they have a thorough knowledge of what is included in the training materials. The installer is a person who has demonstrated to a certain extent the ability to actually construct a project and has documented a limited project-based field experience in placing pervious. So we're saying, okay, now the guy's passed the exam, or even though he's got a few projects under his belt. It's intended for contractor personnel who have achieved this sort of intermediate level of certification by completing the installation of work as indicated in the certification criteria. Installer is expected to assume leadership roles when installing pervious concrete and make decisions as they evolve in their experience on this. It is anticipated that contractor personnel will ultimately, if they continue placing pervious concrete, upgrade to the craftsman level when they reach the work experience criteria for that level. And finally, the craftsman is a person who has demonstrated the ability to place, etc., and has documented a higher level of field time-based experience. So this is not project-based, this is more time-based, based on number of hours of experience. So we assume now that this craftsman is a leader type, taking a leadership type role, and will be able to make decisions during a project with respect to instructing the crew on the proper delegation of duties and assignments, evaluate site conditions and ambient conditions prior to and during a pour, make a evaluation of the mixture and make decisions regarding the placement of the mixture based on its characteristics. And even some people have said to work closely with the ready mix producer to fine-tune the mixture that would be necessary for the type of equipment that they are using on that particular project, because it might vary whether you're using a weighted roller or a roller screed or some other method of placement. Also make decisions when a pour needs to be stopped because either the mix is not right, or there's a cold front coming through, or there's something else wrong with the project. So now we're assuming that the craftsman does take on a higher leadership role. So these are the criteria. What has changed here is that for the installer level, the ACI flatwork technician was eliminated. So otherwise it's basically the same except for a little more detail on the craftsman. So the technician completes the written exam. That's all he has to do, get 75%, and you get the technician certification. Installer will have to go through, besides passing the exam, a performance evaluation administered by the local sponsoring group that can be done at a demonstration or on a project. There is a checklist that the examiner of the local sponsoring group would have to go through and evaluate an individual's performance of installation. And then he has to document 3 projects with a total area exceeding 10,000 square feet. So at least 3 projects, total area exceeding. And we're not talking about, and we're not asking the local sponsoring group to necessarily judge the quality of the project, though that would be good if they can. We don't want to get into a matter of opinion type thing with the criteria, and that's what we have to be careful with. The committee still felt that the ACI flatwork technician certification was necessary for the highest level of certification, and there are 2 options relative to the work experience. If they have 1,500 hours of work experience, they have to do a performance evaluation. If they have 3,000 hours of Pervious concrete experience, they do not have to go through a performance evaluation. The committee has developed a spreadsheet that will document, or that should be used to document the work experience of the contractor. We also are now asking that there is a 3-member committee. Local sponsoring groups in their original application have established a 3-member committee, and we want to try to put those guys to work so that it's not an individual opinion on the evaluation of the work experience. We're asking that this be done by a 3-member committee if possible. And they would look at the work experience and determine whether they should approve it. So we're putting the responsibility of evaluating the submitted work experience documentation on the local sponsoring group. I'll go through that spreadsheet a little later in this presentation. Okay, let's see. Certifications are valid for 5 years. Since we have now, I think, exceeded the 5 years since we originally had certifications, we are probably coming up to people who might be eligible for recertification. Hopefully they're still in the industry and want to recertify. Technicians can, of course, upgrade to installer. Installer can upgrade to craftsman. The expiration of their certification is linked back to their date of exam. So even if they're in midterm through their certification and upgrade to installer or craftsman, they have to recertify based on the date of when they took the exam. The examination criteria is that the written and performance exam are primarily derived from the text, and we try not to deviate from the text because that's the basis for the content. The questions on technology and installation procedures. They are administered by approved examiners, proctors, and supplemental examiners as described in the policy document, and we'll talk a little bit about examiners. Now, the LSG, of course, has no jurisdiction over the content or grading of the written exam. All the written exams are sent back to NRMCA, who then grades and issues results and certificates. All the exams are closed book. They're not allowed to review anything during the exam, and they should not have any text material with them during a performance evaluation. They can review the performance checklist, of course, prior to an evaluation. The written exam, of course, is based on the certification text. We've increased this. This is at least 60 multiple choice or true-false questions that they have to answer. We have developed an exam bank of about 100 or more questions, and we continually switch in new questions into these exams. When we get exams returned to us, we will periodically look at how all these questions are answered and catch or pick out questions that are not being answered well and see if there are any reasons for that and if they can be fixed with respect to the wording or whatever. They are given 2 hours, and this is generally more than enough time for them to complete the exam, unless, of course, you want to and have to administer a oral exam, and that is permitted for people who have a challenge with reading and writing. Of course, the minimum score is 75% to pass the exam. The performance evaluation is based on the NRMCA certification text. It can be at a demo or a mock-up or on a project where a representative, supplemental examiner, or the examiner of the local sponsoring group can be on site to evaluate the procedures used by individuals in their performance evaluation and hopefully get them to do all the various steps or get involved with all the various steps that are necessary as required by the performance checklist. They have to check that off with the pass or fail. The committee is still fine-tuning the requirements of the checklist, and we might change that form in a short term. Naturally, they have to have no significant variation, and naturally the examiner and people reviewing someone's work can make a judgment about the adequacy of their procedures, even if it varies from stuff that the text says. We have enough wording in the text where alternatives are permitted if they primarily do not impact the permeability of the pavement. After finishing the performance evaluation, the examiner should inform the examinee of the results. They are permitted 2 trials. And if they fail the second trial, they should probably come back and do the performance exam some other day. The work experience, again, is for installer and craftsman level, except for the craftsman with 3,000 hours of work experience is exempt from doing a performance evaluation. NRMCA reserves the right to verify the documentation. When you're ordering exams, a little bit about the detail of the exam ordering process. We request that you provide at least 2-week notice prior to the exam date, so we have enough time to prepare the shipment out for the exams. And you know, we have some restraints on our resources. And sometimes if people are out and you want the exams tomorrow, it may be hard to comply with your request. We do have a recommended form that you can use to order your exams. This is form PCC 11. This is sort of filled out by Shonita just as an example of the form that you might use, where you fill out all the information and the number of texts and written exams that you want. And the pricing is on this form, and this pricing is for local sponsoring group, and the person placing the order can sign and date the form. So this is a form that we provide, and we request that you try to use it. But if you don't want to use it, please send your request in writing by email to Shonita, sdickens@nrmca.org. We will not take orders by phone. We want you to send something in writing so that if there's a problem with whatever we send you, we have backup information on that. This is a big problem that we see, is that we do not want to compromise the integrity of the exam. It takes a lot of time and effort to create exam questions. We do not want local sponsoring groups to open the exams and try to teach to the exam. We want local sponsoring groups, and this is standard for all ACI certifications, that you order exams and you send back all the exams that you ordered. You will be billed only for the exams that you use. So if you're not sure how many people will attend your program, order extra exams, and we'll send you extra exams and return all those you do not use, and you will only be billed for that. Please do not keep unused exams on the shelf. We realize that at some point you may have people coming in maybe a day or two later, and so hold that whole shipment before you send it back, and send all the exams back when everybody who intends to take the exam has completed it. So we please request that you do this. Just a few details about the exam, and I'll go through a few of these forms. You have some sort of a detailed instructions for the examiner on this form PCC4 that sort of discusses in detail, and it's a lot of reading. And when I get my ACI package, I never read this stuff, but maybe you should read it at least once so that you understand what the recommended processes are. Okay. On the exam, there is a unique exam number that is filled in by us, and that has some meaning to us. This is the exam number or the exam identification number that will be put on the exam booklet, that needs to be put on the Scantron sheet that the examinees complete, as well as on the sign-in sheet, and I'll show you the sign-in sheet. But that exam number is related to an exam version, so it'll have a unique solution to it, and it also lists the session and the number of people taking the exam at that session. So there's some reason to this coding or something. So make sure that people complete all the information that's required. We very often get people that do not complete their address, and then they complain that they did not get their results. And so that it's important that they write that clearly so that we can send them the results directly. They are also required to sign this pledge, and their signature is important on this in this front page. There's also an ability to challenge any question on the exam, and if they do challenge, and I'll show you the challenge form, they need to check this box or the appropriate box if they do have a challenge on any exam question, so that we can look at their challenge and give them credit if they make sense. Inside the exam booklet, there are some detailed instructions for the examinee. And we ask you during the exam, and since you have to open the booklet, this is on page 2 of the exam, give them a few minutes to read the instructions before you start the clock. Finally, on the last page of the exam, there is a challenge form, and they should complete the challenge form, check off the box on the first page so that we know to look at the challenge form. And they need to list the question and the reason for their challenge as to why they feel the question was not worded right or the choices were not all mutually exclusive. The examiner has to do at least fill out these 3 forms. PCC 7 is an exam materials checklist. That sort of is completed by Shonita when she ships the exams out to you. She will list the number of textbook shipped, the number of written examinations shipped, and the amount of Scantron shipped. If you want installer and Craftsman applications, you can ask for them, or you can download them off our website. They're all posted on our website also. And if you want the performance evaluation checklist, we can even ship you the thing. Now, the thing that once you finish the exam, you have to verify, first of all, that you received the number that we shipped you. So just write about whatever number. And then you include the number that were used and returned and numbers that were not used and returned. And naturally, you will be only billed or invoiced for the number that you used. The examiner should complete the rest of this form and also the details here so that we can contact if there's a problem with the shipment. That's one form. This is a sign-in, sign-out form, and we ask that when the examinees come into the thing that they put their name, their signature, the booklet number that's on the right-hand top corner of the booklet, and some verification here that when they complete their exam, the examiner will verify that their code on the Scantron sheet and the exam booklet are the same real quickly, and make sure that all that is in order. Hopefully their name also is in both places so that we can link their Scantron sheet to their exam booklet. So make sure that you fill in this information and submit that to with the exam package, so that we can link and have a backup of each examinee's exam. It's really hard if we lose someone's exam, and we want to avoid that. Then there's a last form here that you basically have to complete. Is just the information from the examiner, their company, and naturally the examiner has submitted an application and is approved examiner. the date, the location, the local sponsoring group, any proctors or supplemental examiners used, and probably an important part is that you verify that you did not administer examinations to people that work for the same company or are related to you in some way. Sign and date this form and send it in with the package. I think this is relatively simple and is basically the same type of form work that is required for ACI certifications, and it keeps us with the proper documentation that's necessary when we administer the exams. So these last three forms should be included when you return exams. Please use some traceable method of shipment so that if there is no way that we can actually say that something got lost, or if it did get lost, there is some way to track where it got lost. Okay. The exam results are generally processed within 2 weeks. If you are requesting an expedited processing, we are instituting a $25 fee for each exam if the request is for within 5 business days. You know, this is what our normal processing time is. In general, if it's slow, Shonita processes these exams at a much faster rate and sends the results out. Naturally, we want all the forms that are properly filled out, or that may delay the processing of the exam results. The local sponsoring group will get a session summary that will look like this, where you will be given an average score for the session, the highest score, and the lowest score for the session, who was the examiner of record, the number of examinees, the number that passed, the number that failed, and each individual who actually took the exam, their expiration date, and if they failed, that'll be indicated on there. So the local sponsoring group will not get individual scores. That is sort of a general policy of NRMCA for all the certification programs, that individual scores will not be provided to anybody other than the examinee. If the employer requests that, he needs to request the score in writing, and we will provide the score to the employer on that type of a request. So local sponsoring groups only get this summary, whether it's pass or fail, but not individual scores. The letter with the exam score, certificate, and card will be sent to the examinee directly. So we need to have their proper contact information. Re-exam criteria, if they fail it, they have to retake it. If they fail a performance exam, they have to retake the entire exam. So that's clear. Appeals criteria, they can appeal the process directly to the examiner, and if they are not satisfied with the response of the examiner, they need to sort of follow a process by which the local sponsoring group committee gets involved in whatever they're appealing. And if that's not if they're not happy with that, then they can approach NRMCA, and we'll establish a 3-member group with the committee to evaluate the appeal. Of course, if they're challenging exam questions, they have to challenge it at the time of writing the exam, not later after the scores are provided. The sponsoring group, of course, all local sponsoring groups are approved. They have to complete their application form. Form PCC1 is there. They must be approved before conducting certifications. The preferred local sponsoring groups, as stated in the policy, is basically state affiliates of NRMCA, if there is one in a region that can satisfy a geographical area. The local sponsoring group should establish a certification committee of at least 3 individuals. Those individuals have to complete this form PCC2, and there should be at least one person not belonging to the local sponsoring group if possible. Obtain the services of an examiner to conduct the exam. The examiner has to complete this form. A change in the policy now permits the primary contact of the local sponsoring group, such as the executive director or that person, to actually serve as the examiner. Again, the examiner doesn't have to be very knowledgeable about pervious concrete for proctoring an exam. If they are involved in performance evaluations, naturally they have to be, but they just have to be trustworthy type people when they are proctoring the exam, so that they make sure that the exam is administered to a credible level. Sponsoring groups are assigned a specific geographical area, and we try to avoid overlaps. If there is a group that is requested to conduct a certification in an area that belongs to another local sponsoring group, please communicate so that there is no problem with overlapping areas. We sort of approve for 5 years, but this is just a paperwork issue, and we recently sent you out reapproval processes, and the purpose primarily is to ensure that people still exist, like your certification committee, and the relevant contacts are still in place at the local sponsoring groups, because this type of information is listed on our website. So you should have received that form, and we've got it back from most of you all, and some of you still haven't sent that reapproval form. So we plan to do that every 2 years. This is not a real strict approval process, but just to ensure that the information is current. We do have a few national groups that are approved, and one of them is the American Society of Concrete Contractors, and they are sort of approved to be a certification group. When they take their annual conventions to different areas of the country, they are permitted to administer a certification program along with that, along with their convention, and they have done that in the past. And they normally try to use the help of local contractors and also the local sponsoring group. NRMCA reserves the right to revoke a group's application or approval with explanation, and the group may appeal, and that's sort of written in the policy document. The responsibility of the sponsoring group primarily is to maintain the integrity of the certification program, to understand and comply with the policy, and to conduct sessions or adequate sessions to support the area's needs. And you know, if people want to get certified in a certain area, there should be the ability for them to get certified. And we've got pretty good coverage with local sponsoring groups, but there are still some areas of the U.S. where we do not have an established local sponsoring group that is capable of conducting the certification programs. And in some cases, we've asked a ACI chapter or an ACI sponsoring group if they are interested in administering the certification in a particular area where we don't have one. Now, this is just the criteria on the examiner. We have in the past required a registered professional engineer, and the only reason for that is we could use his license to challenge if there was some complaint on how the exam was administered. And the recent policy change is now allowing primary contacts of the local sponsoring group. One of the problems with our exam return process is we do need the examiner of record to sign off on those forms. That is important for us to maintain that record, okay? Because if anybody challenges whether a certification was done, that is our record saying the approved examiner has signed off on this particular exam and the associated pledge that goes along with it. So please sign those forms and return those back with the exams, because that is needed before we process the exam. The examiner, we'll talk a little bit about responsibilities, but basically one of the reasons why we are allowing a primary contact is, yeah, we trust them, and secondly, when they have to do certifications in different parts of the state, let's say, they may not always have the ability to get a PE to proctor the exam. We've addressed this before by saying that, well, the PE doesn't necessarily have to be present as long as they delegate someone who is trustworthy as a proctor or supplemental examiner as addressed in the policy documents. If the PE who is signing off or is the established examiner of record feels comfortable with the person proctoring the exam, they don't have to be present during the session, but they still need to sign off on the exam form, which can be done electronically and sent to us. The PE can assign supplemental examiners to assist with the performance and written exam and that type of stuff. Some of the responsibilities of the engineer are of the examiner, if you will, are addressed here. They have to approve supplemental examiners and proctors, order, receive, and keep custody of the exam. That's very important, that it's not lying around during the training session. Verify the identity of the examinees who have registered for the program and the right person is taking the exam. Co-sign the examination checklist. Enter the grade if you do a performance exam. Return all written exams used and unused and sign off on the necessary forms, PCC 5, PCC 6, and PCC 7. The examiner should not make interpretations of questions to individuals taking the exam. And when they are administering a performance exam, one person should not proctor more than 6 examinees during a performance evaluation. Our responsibilities here at NRMCA are to approve local sponsoring groups, approve examiners, authorize the local sponsoring group to conduct examination sessions, to develop and grade the exams, to review the results of the performance exam, to notify results, certify and authorize certificates, and send the certificates for successful examinees. And we do have a clause in there that we can revoke certification for cause. And we haven't necessarily defined the process, but we can develop that if that comes up. But we can basically revoke if there was reasons for misrepresentation by an examinee or applicant on certification. Recertification at this point is once every 5 years. At this point, whether they are certified at different levels, the only requirement for recertification is to take the written exam. We do have an NRMCA certification committee, like I told you, and some of their requirements are to make decisions on certification policy. We do have a requirement that they have a minimum of 9 members of the committee, and that's balanced between at least 3 groups there. We have a definition of the consensus process and a majority vote rules. This is the policy document that was sent to you all, I think, with the items in red that indicated changes from the previous document. I'll just go through these real quickly. Basically, the definition of the intent of the certification level, like I showed you in a previous slide, and also of the technician, the installer, and the craftsman. The same information is posted also on the NRMCA website as to the definition and the intent for different levels. This thing about expedited fees. We've also sort of tried to define how someone would quantify their work experience, and I'll show you that spreadsheet as we come along. And basically that you can basically upgrade by completing the required criteria. Project experience here is verified and signed off by the primary contact of the local sponsoring group. So we are placing the responsibility for validation of the claims to the primary contact of the local sponsoring group. Same thing for the craftsman with this work experience in addition to an evaluation by the 3-member certification committee. This is the revision over here that previously we required a registered professional engineer. Now we are permitting the primary contact to be an examiner for an exam. The forms, slight changes. This is the application or the examiner step-by-step information that references the required forms that are necessary. The types of applications are over here for the installer, for the craftsman, with the spreadsheet, and the performance of evaluation form. Now these are all posted on our website, so you can download and print them off. This is all the same forms that you've seen before. We are asking again that all of this information, when an exam package is sent back to us, is completed. Otherwise, it will delay processing. Regarding the performance evaluation, the committee has sort of developed a little bit of additional guidance that you need to do at least a full width pad of 10 foot in length and not a small area smaller than that as to what a performance evaluation minimum should be. Complete the spreadsheet for the Craftsman application, and I'll go through that a little bit. This is where for the Craftsman, we're trying to give some sort of what one of the committee members felt is a smell test. What he claims is reasonable and accurate. If they say they placed 50,000 square foot in a day, it may not be reasonable and accurate. And so when they put this information on the spreadsheet, that the committee evaluates it and feels that what he's claiming is reasonable and therefore will have an ability to approve it. So they've given some guidance here on what might be reasonable. Someone can't claim that they've got 1,500 hours if they've only been in the Pervious business for 1 year. And that's sort of the idea, unless he was working 16 hours a day all year. And then they've tried to define, the committee's tried to define what time can be counted towards work experience, that is actual placement and preparing for the job, and what time, and what you'll notice here also is that even time spent in continuing education on Pervious concrete might be considered acceptable, but that is sort of capped at about 100 hours per application. Attending of committee meetings, planning and participating on demos and participating on training programs. And a lot of the experienced contractors get involved and do these sorts of things, and they are allowed now to capture that time. And time that should not be counted is time when they're wandering expo shows, part of the bidding process where they're arguing with the owner or fighting with the ready mix producer. All those sorts of, that type of time is not necessarily counted. Okay. On the application, you have to list your committee that reviewed the Craftsman application. And so that's basically some of the changes that are in the policy documents that I just wanted to go through real quick. Okay. The installer application. Again, I'll just open this up real quick. This is first part has to be completed by the installer. There's a $25 fee for the application. They need to put in their information. They need to put in their score and certification ID on the exam, the date they actually took the exam and where did they take it. And they have to go through a performance evaluation that was submitted to NRMCA. They have to list their projects on this form and any references that the primary contact can talk to if they need to verify any of the claims by the applicant. So these 2 pages have to be filled in and signed by the applicant, and the next page has to be completed by the local sponsoring group primary contact, where they basically are signing off on the application saying that whatever is claimed is correct. So again, the responsibility for this is being placed on the local sponsoring group. For the applicant, Craftsman application, it's the same thing. You have to fill in the necessary parts of this. It's very similar, except we'll get to the spreadsheet and basically which option they're using. 1,500 hours with a performance exam or 3,000 plus hours without the performance exam. And the total documented hours can be claimed over here with the signature of the applicant. This part is sort of instructions to the local sponsoring group. A 3-member committee has reviewed the application listed over here, and the primary contact will sign off on this and submit that to NRMCA. This shouldn't come by itself. It should come with the spreadsheet, and I'll just open up the spreadsheet that was developed by the committee. And it has various pages. It has the first page here that has the basic instructions where the applicant will fill in his information. That goes along with this. And you've got 5 tabs here that have a lot of space if you want to fill in projects. And basically I filled in some dummy projects. Once I fill in my name, it'll come in on this page. I can use this particular tab to say this is my work experience for a certain period of time or with a certain company. I fill in the project name, where it's located, who was the owner, if I want to fill in the general contractor's name, someone that can be contacted to verify the total square footage, the amount of cubic yards of concrete placed. And this form was sort of recommended by contractors who are doing projects, and they feel that they have enough records to complete this form. How many hours was spent by this individual on the project? And then what was the total duration of the project in terms of 8-hour days? So this gives you some other numbers that may or may not make sense to you. We ask that they also report what they were involved in. Now on this second project, he said he was sort of involved in everything, okay? And then he sort of lists which company he was with on that project, which company he worked for down below over here with the contact of the principal of that particular contractor firm. So this is the sort of smell test so that we have adequate documentation. This is naturally will have to add up to a total number of hours that exceed the required criteria. When they finish that, there's also one more page here. They don't have to fill in all these tabs if they don't have more information. But there is this one tab that the committee felt was important for someone who wants to be awarded a craftsman, is for them to list at least 3 problems. This is off the top of my head, on 3 problems that they have encountered during their installation of pervious concrete. And so this is their problem. The mix was too dry, and what was their resolution to the problem. And that also is background information that the committee can evaluate whether the person is adequate to give a craftsman level certification. On the last page, there's a summary that brings in all the information from all the other sheets. Brings in the total square footage, the total number of hours. Naturally, the number of hours is what governs whether they get their certification or not. All the other summary statistics came in with that from the different sheets. The number of problems that he listed on the problem encountered sheet is listed over here. The local sponsoring group's committee name names and information is listed over here. If they have any comments. Now, I just put in a comment here saying Project 2 seemed to be unreasonable for one manly man to complete. But we went back to him, we requested clarification, we are satisfied with the response, and we approved the application. So if the committee wants to put any notes on their approval process, they can put it in that spot. Okay, so that's what the committee feels is necessary for getting Craftsman application. So again, both these forms, application form and the spreadsheet, need to come back to NRMCA. You have to send the spreadsheet, of course, by email, and then they should be reviewed and approved by the local sponsoring group committee, a minimum of 3 members. I'll just go through real quick some of the resources on the website that you might see. So if you go to nrmca.org, you will see on the left side over here the certification tab, and the certification tab you can go to, if you just mouse over it, you can get to the Pervious Contractor certification. Here you will see the database of all NRMCA certified people, but specifically on Pervious, the listing of approved sponsoring groups with contact information, applications that can be used by sponsoring groups, and the other forms that would be useful. Here is the sort of definition of the different levels and the recommended intent by the committee. And the other forms here with respect to the certification policy, the installer application, the craftsman application, the performance evaluation form, some of the things that might be necessary for PPE and equipment during a performance evaluation. And here comes the criteria that are clearly stated on this particular page for technician, for installer, and for craftsman. So here you can download both the form for craftsman and the work experience form, work experience worksheet. Okay. If you go back here, you can find the applications for local sponsoring groups where you have all the information here, or whatever you need by form can be downloaded and printed out. Shonita's information is here if you need to contact her. And if you go back here, you can see the list of approved local sponsoring groups that we want to try to keep updated with respect to the contact name, phone number, and I don't see email addresses. Okay, yeah, and email addresses here when we have them. So people who are interested in certification can go by area and contact someone if they want to get certified. And finally, on the database of certified Pervious contractors, probably opens another window over here with a disclaimer saying whatever as requested by our lawyers. So if I want to, this is basically 10,000 people certified in this database, so it includes not only Pervious but various other certification programs. If I want to go to, let's say, Florida, I will just click down Florida, and I found that I've got a lot of items over here, but I can also now break it down by Pervious concrete technicians. And what I'll see here is I got 435 people certified in Florida as Pervious concrete technicians. If I want to look at installers, I can click on installers, and I got 2 people. And so I can find people by state. Now, one of the things that the committee has requested is to also put the company name, and this sort of generally is something that it goes against our policy for most certified people just because of confidentiality reasons. But this was an attempt to say if people want to find a contractor that has certified people, we need to list their names. Naturally, we will ask people if they want their company listed, if possible, so that we can list their company name. And many state associations and local sponsoring groups do have listings of people or contractors in their particular market. So that's what's available on the website regarding this particular the database of certified individuals. Okay, let's see what else. Okay, let me go back here. So that's available on the website. Now, one last slide, and this is a recommendation now, or the NRMCA Certification Committee has made a recommendation to ACI 522, which writes the specification on pervious concrete, to diminish the concept of using technicians. And that was the primary thing, is to say we need to have people who have work experience when they establish contractors. So this is a proposed revision to the ACI 522 specification. I only took out the section on contractor qualification. That is on ballot, so it's not approved yet. But if it's approved by the committee, then it goes through an ACI approval process. But it does list that the contractor should employ no less than 1 craftsman or 3 installers, and technician language has been removed from this. So that is something that trying to force people who have project experience to separate themselves as men from the boys, or whatever you want to call it, and so that people are sort of have that work experience qualification as part of this team. Now, naturally, an alternative is permitted when approved by the AE, as is for most requirements. So that's what's happening in ACI 522. Naturally, our committee has not much control on what happens in the 522 process other than making suggestions, though we have friends on that committee. So that's basically all I had, and if you have any questions, you can always call us, and Shonita is the head honcho on the certification program as to where are my exams and where are my results and that type of stuff, and I can always be contacted if there are questions regarding the content of the program, and Lionel too with respect to that part. And so between the three of us, we should have a response for you at any time. So that's basically what I wanted to talk about. I think I went long, and I hope I didn't put you to sleep. But at this point, I will open up the line so that you can speak. And so you might want to mute yourself if you have a party going on in the background. But feel free to ask me any questions that you have, and I see that Lionel's online, so any tough questions, I'm going to pass it on to him.
This is Larry, and I was going back to my original question of are there any plans to produce these materials in Spanish?
Yeah, there have been requests for the development of Spanish content. I think our initial intent or something is to get maybe the examination developed in Spanish. Now the committee has felt, and this is probably experience with the ACI flat work, that there are very proficient Spanish-speaking contractors that do very good work, but some of them are to a point where they are not even literate in Spanish. And even if they are literal in colloquial Spanish, they may not understand the terms and notations used in a translation used or developed by us. And so we're still evaluating how we can get people who are, of good workers and who may not be able to answer exam either due to language or just education level to get certified. And we're not come up with a total resolution. But as an initial step, we will likely develop exam questions in parallel in Spanish, and if anybody has any ideas to help us out with that, then we can use your help. And at this point, Bruce Chatton has said he's got a contact who can help us with that, and then probably many of you all also have some other contacts like that.
Okay.
Any other questions? Greg?
Colin?
Yeah, Greg? Is that Greg or someone else?
This is Scott.
Scott, yes, Scott.
I'm not sure how many LSGs are out there, but I just want to emphasize how important it is that they really take care on the craftsmanship. If somebody's applying for that, make sure they use that spreadsheet. This is getting to be really a big deal because specifications are being put out that says you have to have a craftsman. If you don't and you bid it, some of them will throw the bid out, some of them will accept it, and that happened out west here, and there's going to be lawsuits. And there will be challenges to your craftsmen if they don't pass the smell test. So if there's any question, examine them closely, because it's a big contractual deal. It's a legal issue now with the specs being asked to be require craftsmen. So they better meet the criteria, or it will cause some big headaches for everybody.
Yes, sir. I have no response to that. I take that under advisement, and yes, we will make sure that people are submitting. And we've actually not processed any Craftsman applications while we were revising the criteria. Greg, are you able to speak? Greg Nowitzki? Okay, I'll read Greg's question. He says that I said do not teach the exam, but some questions play gotcha with the instructors. Specific example is the use of a proctor hammer for unit weight. Now I teach them what a proctor hammer is. Well, I think that is covered in the content. I mean, you have to cover the content. We try to avoid playing gotcha or try to avoid trick questions, but a trick question often is a matter of opinion. So I'm not sure how we can solve that. But what I'm suggesting is that we do not compromise the exam where someone is actually looking at the exam and trying to teach specifically to exam questions. The review questions are adequate. The review questions are generally in line with the exam questions. So if you stay sort of overboard and try to teach to the review questions, and that should get them adequately prepared for the exam. Does that help, Greg? Any other questions? Okay, Greg says his microphone is not working. That's a good thing. But hopefully I answered your question, and that satisfies you. So again, if I think I've recorded this session, and we will have it uploaded on the website, and Shonita will send you a link if you want to put yourself to sleep and go through the whole webinar. But the intent of recording it is basically to allow people who missed this session, if they want to listen to it. Okay, so if there are no questions, I thank you for attending. Please keep in touch. Hopefully we can continue the certification programs. Just a note on the text. If you have any revisions that we stated incorrectly in the text, please send that in to us. We are doing a slight revision on the text that will be at the next printing, is to satisfy the Canadians. And we do have some Canadian local sponsoring groups online. Basically, there will be SI units or metric units in parentheses, as well as when a relevant Canadian standard exists, we will have reference to the appropriate Canadian standard in that. And so that will happen at the next printing. And naturally, if they are offering a certification program that needs that, then we will have that type of text available specifically for them.
When is the next printing, Colin?
When we run out of what we have on the shelf right now. But if you have a program coming up, I have been working with Bart with Ontario, and he's verified all my metric conversions. He has to just give me some guidance on the relevant appropriate Canadian standards that I need to reference. And that's done, so we can print a separate printing just for you.
Wow, that's great.
Okay, I thank you for attending, and have a great week.
You too.
Thank you, Colin.
Okay, bye.